it's funny in some regards to imagine just like do 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 like around New York being like, gonna go get this peanut butter. Hello and welcome to the Uncovery podcast this week. My name is Maddie. I've had anorexia for over a decade and I'm now in recovery, and I'm recovering loudly so that you can all come along for the ride and we can open up better and bigger and deeper and more authentic conversations about eating disorders, mental health, and everything that comes along with that. Before we dive into today's episode, coffee. As if you're a listener, you will know, I've been trying a variety of new milks to sort of challenge myself as we go along. And mostly I'm fine with anything that I come across these days in terms of milks for coffees. But I have not tried coconut milk. So far, oat milk is very much a front runner. But let's give this a try. I am not going to do this and record the swallowing of it because that is such a gross sound. So I will spare you that. Here we go. Ooh. Okay, we like coconut milk. We're a fan. This would be a once in a while. I don't need to taste coconut all the time, but that's really nice. It's got a nice little like sweetness to it, and it's very creamy. Okay, fantastic. Onwards. Today's episode, we're talking about hoarding and scarcity mindset. And this came about because I was organizing and cleaning, which I really like to do. And I, do seasonally, like fall cleaning, spring cleaning, just to sort of, organize, tidy before the next sort of season of your life. I don't know if anybody else does that, but I was doing this. And part of that is getting rid of clothes, not trying them on before doing that, but just knowing intuitively that they are definitely too small, time to get rid of them. I don't need to put myself through the torture of putting things on that don't fit. Do you know what I mean? I'd just as soon get rid of them without even experiencing that. That's just me. So organize my closet, organizing my storage room and laundry room. And I don't have like a proper pantry. I sort of have a lazy Susan in my kitchen, but so some of my food storage of extra things and bulk buys, which we'll get into, go into my storage room / laundry room. And I realized that I have a lot of multiples. Like stuff is stacked very high. And I think I wanted to talk about this because I realized that I would be rather, I don't know, embarrassed is the right word, if somebody sort of just went into my storage / laundry room and was like, what the hell is all of this stuff? Like, why do you have so many of these things? Multiple packages of this, multiple packages of that. Like, I know it's not normal. I know it's too much. And that being said, it is a lot less than it used to be, or in previous sort of chapters of my life in eating disorder. It's improved something, but it's still definitely a thing for me. Or I just hoarded so much stuff before that it's still lasting me. I'm not rebuying as much as I used to. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. Of course, during this period of time in the world, and in my recovery, they happen to coincide that I'm eating a lot more. I'm, then buying a lot more food. And, there's a food shortage and sky high inflation. And of course, this is when I chose to go into really full, proper recovery, is when it would be the most expensive to do so. Anyways, we're going to do it anyway. So let's talk about hoarding and scarcity. It might seem counterintuitive for someone with a restrictive eating disorder to be hoarding food, but it's actually a really serious and important symptom that I don't think a lot of professionals ask about. I've certainly not really been asked about it in my own recovery. I sort of have come across it more, in reading that I've done and other people's experiences of it. So it makes total sense when you think about it from a biological perspective. So if somebody is living in an environment of scarcity, you would hoard items, but it's not picked up on a lot. So because we tend to not eat food, people tend to not recognize that it's an issue for people with restrictive eating disorders. It's one of these really, really bizarre, weird, specific things that I always thought was just me until I sort of read a little bit more and realized that this is actually quite a common thing for a lot of us that have eating disorders. So to back up on what is sort of causing any hoarding behaviors or, collecting extras and having multiples, all of that behavior, I want to talk about scarcity mindset. And there's actually a book that I really, really love. And I recommend it not really in the context of eating disorders, but just generally. It's called Scarcity. And it's a book that I read and came across during my master's in behavioral science. And it essentially talks about all of the psychological impacts and life outcomes of living in an environment of scarcity, for example, poverty, and how that ends up manifesting in people's lives. So that's a really good book just in general, but it also sort of speaks to what psychological scarcity can do to your brain. And it's basically what your brain adopts when it believes that resources are scarce. And so for a human, let's, take it back to when we were evolving, it would have been one of the biggest threats to our survival. So the ability to hunt and gather, we needed to be able to do that. But in times where we didn't have enough, we would need to go and find more food or we would die. So I think that we can really link this to evolution in some ways, because if we're in a state of prolonged food scarcity and just general resource scarcity, our brains will urge us along to collect more, especially those things that are important to us. That calms our anxiety about being able to find resources and food. And it also means that then when we start to use our stockpiled things, it increases our anxiety again until we can sort of replenish the stores that we have. So if resources are scarce evolutionarily, you're stressed because your life is at risk. And I think that this is part of the psychological behavior that then we see in people with eating disorders, potentially hoarding and collecting extras of things, especially food. In COVID, to make an example relevant to maybe the masses, is when everything shut down, everybody can remember sort of the run on toilet paper. So everybody was going to buy toilet paper, and then there was a scarcity of it, which then just increased the demand and made people feel more stressed about not having access to a very basic item of need. In COVID, for people with eating disorders, or at least for myself and, from experiences that have been shared with me, the inability to find the foods that felt safe to me was incredibly stressful. So doing grocery runs or those grocery orders, because nobody was going to the grocery store and getting these deliveries, and having to psychologically feeling that I had to stockpile all of these things that I needed, like shelves and shelves full of these things and multiples and multiples. And God bless my parents, because we were sort of quarantined and stuck down in our house in Phoenix. And, they were so accepting of this. I think, because they're very understanding of, how do we sort of help Maddie in her eating disorder recovery, whatever sort of version of quasi-recovery that I was in, and just knowing how stressed that I already was, and sort of accommodating that, but just shelves full of backups on backups on backups of like sugar-free Jell-O and like sodas and just things that made me feel like the world was going to be okay. But this is a starved brain. And that's why that becomes so, so important and such a focal point for people that are in ongoing malnutrition. So the further you sort of fall down the rabbit hole of your eating disorder, the worse this behavior can get. And, at some points I just like my freezer was full of frozen stuff that I was never going to eat. And my cupboards were full of things that I was never going to eat. And it was part just having food surrounding you. There's something to that your body just wants it so bad that at least it's in the area, but you're overriding every biological urge you have to eat all of this food. And it can be really strange and stressful and sad. And it's, I think, just another factor that plays into why when you have an eating disorder, it's so difficult to change context or be flexible in your life. Going on vacation, well, where am I going to get all my things? Where am I going to store all of these things? It's a hugely impactful part that I don't think that we really acknowledge or talk about so much, because it just goes along with all of these other restrictive behaviors. But it's something that's, I think probably more common than we realize. And, analogous to the sort of run on toilet paper that happened during COVID, this behavior of hoarding and this scarcity mindset crosses contexts. So prolonged perceived food scarcity gives us all kinds of other anxieties in regards to other resources. So we know, in our real logical brains that resources are not scarce. I'm not actually going to run out of things, most of the time. Like the world is actually kind of crazy. And so now this scarcity mindset is actually somewhat warranted. But generally speaking, and especially if you're, privileged to have a job and to have access to these resources, I know that the grocery store is still going to be there tomorrow. I know that I'm going to be able to access the things I need, or that there actually are things around that I could have in place of these things that I think that I want to have so many of. But you can't fight this bizarre little part of you that just needs to collect more and more and more. When I was at my worst, especially, just like needing to make sure that everything was enough. And that if it wasn't, I was just filled with anxiety. It was so stressful. I hate how this sort of made me. I hated having to be so aware of all of the things that I needed to have all the time and making lists and buying so much stuff. But it was like I couldn't stop. But it goes beyond just food. So buying multiples of things like, toilet paper, for instance, or, paper towels, or being afraid of spending money on things, which is so ironic because you're buying all of these extra things, which then causes you to be really tight about other things that you're spending them on. It's bizarre. And so, for instance, like candles or incense. It's like, well, you could just buy one, but you've stockpiled all of these things that you like, and you have multiples of them, or plastic cutlery or safety pins, or having 1,000 hair elastics and bobby pins. Which bobby pins is like, well, you lose them all the time, so you kind of need to have like 1,000 of them. Anybody that uses bobby pins knows that you need to have a stockpile of bobby pins somewhere, because who knows where they go. But that kind of thing, like just having backups of hair products and multiple makeup brushes and sponges and things that have never been used or barely been touched, just in case. And it's like, just in case of what? So this whole mindset, it transcends food. It goes outside of that. And soon you're drowning under all this stuff. You have nowhere to put it anymore. So it's a really bizarre thing. And it's something that, as I'm kind of been renourishing, I'm seeing it shift, where I'm not always just hyper aware of all of the things that I'm running out of. Like, I'm still a person that's really on top of stuff and wants to have the stuff available and not have to do, 1,000 trips to the grocery store. And so doing, one big run makes sense to me in just a time management perspective, but I'm not so fearful of running out of things. And now I'm just like, oh man, I got to use all of this stuff before I get more, because I hate being overwhelmed by it. I hate having all of it around. So that's definitely been changing for me. I've been noticing that shift. But my experience of it in the past has been like really, really strange. You know, I will put my hands into the pockets of old coats or coats from previous seasons and years and just pull out handfuls of Splenda packets that were just there from whatever coffee shop that I, took them from and saved for later, just in case, just to have them. And it's so bizarre, and I feel so awkward about it. And it wasn't something that I think I ever really intended to share. But yeah, I guess in in the interest of authenticity, this is the kind of stuff that we go through. And, hopefully these examples make people feel less alone. There was a period of time where I was really into like almond butters and peanut butters, and I would buy all of the different kinds of peanut butters. And most normal people will not know about this like strange niche industry of like artisan nut butters, but I was obsessed. And I was never eating it, right? I was never properly eating it because it's one of the most highly calorific foods and one of the biggest fear foods that I had and, still struggle with. But I think my body wanted something so calorically dense that just having it present and all of the different, flavors of it and the different variations of it, I was overcome. And so I would order these boxes and boxes of different things online and have them delivered. And then I would freeze them so that I wouldn't eat them, or then I'd sort of pick at them and then I wouldn't really fully ever eat them. And at a certain point, it was basically all that I was eating, but it was in these like little tiny spoonfuls over time. And I mean, one time I went to New York with my mother. This is ridiculous. I didn't think, I don't know if I ever thought I was probably going to talk about this on a podcast, but here we are. I went to New York. I had never been to New York. I was going to New York with my mother at Christmas. And it is, for anybody that's ever met me, this is the dream. This is the ultimate. This is the pinnacle of my life. I got to see the Rockefeller tree. I got to see all of the lights. It was everything I could have possibly wanted. It was just everything. But we spent probably half a day of that trip going around Manhattan to these specialty healthy food stores, like picture like a mini artisan Whole Foods, because I had looked up online on these companies' websites, their store locators, like where can you find this? Where can you buy this? And so I would seek these places out whenever I was in the US, because you can't get all this stuff in Canada and not all of them ship to you. And so it was like hauling. It was probably, I don't even know. I bet you it was like 12 jars of various kinds of like almond butter and peanut butter. Like I can't even describe from this vantage point, looking back, how insane this was. And this was before I was ever out with my eating disorder, right? This was before anybody was really bringing it up to me. And so I can just imagine my mother in New York, like kind of following me around to pick up this stuff that I definitely didn't need. We had to shuffle the stuff in between our bags to get back on the plane to make it home without going over. So we're standing in the check-in at the airport and we're moving peanut butter from one suitcase to the other to like balance out the weight. And somehow by a miracle, we make it, underweight to be able to get our bags on the plane. And I just think about that now. And that, I would go home to bring them home, and I would nibble at them or try them or have them here and there. And then I would feel overwhelmed by how much I liked them. And I would then have to get rid of them. Right? So I want to talk about shame and food waste and just throwing things away because it was too overwhelming for me to even have in the house at that point. Because then if I would start to feel out of control, then I had to get rid of it. So it's so taxing. And I forget sometimes, until I look back, just how in that I was, like how absolutely determined I was to find these things, to have these things, and to be in that existence and to continue to do those things. It was, oh my, like it's funny in some regards to imagine just like do, like around New York being like, gonna go get this peanut butter. And it like, but it's so sad to have that be the focus of your life. And I, the things that you can do if you're not doing that are expansive. So those are a couple of anecdotes of really bizarre, strange experiences that I've had in this particular regard. Maybe it makes somebody else feel a little bit normal. And I will also say that I don't know that you necessarily have to have an eating disorder to have some of these inclinations, and that it isn't shameful if you happen to have a little bit of this anxiety in yourself and it's not eating disorder related. I think people have multiple ways to soothe their anxieties, and people that are stressed about not having enough, if you look into that book Scarcity, it makes a lot of sense why we do the things that we do. So, if this is you, you're not alone. It really, really has improved, and I think will continue to improve for me as we go along, to not have to have the need to have backup for things. And I'm noticing that shift, and I'm going to, make a conscious effort to only buy what I need, only order what you need. And it's only by challenging these little insidious pieces of the eating disorder or of any mental illness to prove to ourselves that we will be fine. If we run out of toothpaste and we have to go to the store and get it, and we didn't have 3 backups or even 1 backup, that's okay. You will prove to yourself that you don't die if that has to happen. And it's like any other part of this recovery process, is to just one step at a time challenge these little things that are happening in your brain, and showing yourself that it's all going to be okay. So push into that discomfort a little bit. I'm going to continue to push into all of my discomfort and uncomfortable things. And that's the episode today. Make sure that you stop by Apple Podcasts and give us a rating. I would absolutely adore that. Send us a message if you have any questions or feedback. We love to hear that. And we will see you on the next episode.